All right, hi everyone. We are going to cover week 8, which was Patterson and Quadfleeg and Steg, Vandenberg, and De Groot, 2012 for physical environment. So in the Patterson and Quadfleeg 2016 article, I want you to go ahead and skip to the power of the settings section. It's on page 192. The first few sections are just nonverbal communication background. We've already covered that pretty extensively throughout our semester, so just go ahead and skip that. So let's start with power of settings. So we first need to understand behavioral settings, and these are bounded geographical locations containing both human and non-human elements that work together to facilitate events or limit time periods. So think about a math class, a funeral service, or doctor's visits. They're pretty specific physical environments that are going to limit your behavioral options as well as limit your time in them. So, these specific physical layouts tell people what they can and can't do. Think about the college classroom. You come in, you take your seat, and you take notes, and then you might go to the front to give a presentation, but that's about it. You don't get up and just walk around during the class. You don't switch seats midway through. We just go in and sit down. And in our college classes, we were only there for 50 minutes or 75 minutes. Well, excluding grad classes. Grad classes, you're typically in there 2.5 hours. But you have set rules, and these are behavioral settings. And then there's also these things called specific actors for the setting. So in a college class, you think of your professor, your students, and we all have a series of events that happen for that class. We don't change roles midway through. We act as a student or act as a professor for the entire class. Next, we move into settings and their characteristics. And so these are major factors in shaping our human behavior. This leads to homogeneity or similarities of behaviors in all parties that are involved, right? So think back to the math class example or a college class. It doesn't have to be a math class. But we sit there and we all act the same. We all take our notes, listen to the professor, write things down in our notebook, everything. We have homogeneity because the settings call for that. Settings don't only convey powerful expectations within them, though, they also attract a specific type of person. So we're not just going to funeral homes and hanging out. There might be some people that do that, but typically that's not something that we enjoy doing. It'd be kind of weird if we did. Um, so they attract a specific type of person within their setting. And some environments can also taint the perception or reputation of its occupants. So I use the example of homeless individuals in my notes. When we see them, we often have bad perceptions. And I know it's a public space, but when you see a homeless individual with all their bags of things that they own, we kind of think poorly of them. And we're conditioned to do so. I'm not saying it's good, we shouldn't, but it's what happens. Think about a person that spends all their time in a bar. That's going to taint the perception of that person. Okay. Moving forward to nonverbal behavior in public. So, presence of strangers. When we're in public, we're often polite or polite enough to strangers. We might give them a quick glance, a smile, but we're not typically going to do more. Some people feel very uncomfortable in the presence of strangers. And so our nonverbal behaviors kind of change because we're going to avert our gaze. This kind of allows us to escape our communal space. Goffman in 1963 called this civil inattention. And basically, it identifies common patterns of mixed motive behaviors when strangers either approach or avoid one another. So, a brief glance might occur when you see a stranger in public um, to show you recognize the presence of them. But the closer we get to strangers, we typically avert our gaze. So, if you think about when you are walking on campus or at your job, right? And somebody new gets hired. We might look at them, we might smile like, "Oh, hi," whatever, but we don't once we get closer, we tend to look away. And that's because we don't know them. We don't know how they're going to react, and it might not be so good. And so we tend to look away. Think about anytime you've been on a subway or a bus. At a far distance, you might look over, get a quick glance, but the closer you get, you're going to look away because you don't want to appear rude as if you're staring. Okay. Power and Power of environmental features. So there were quite a few of these. I've got the actual features that I want you to know. Um, bold, bolded, maybe that's the correct term. I don't know. But these features influence our nonverbal behavior. So these are physical elements that are shared by different behavioral settings. Okay. Um, so lighting is going to occur in a funeral home, in a college class, um, in a doctor's office. There's lighting everywhere, of course, but the lighting in a doctor's office might be different than in a bar, but they're two very different settings. Okay. So the features that influence behavior are lighting, of course. This is used to decrease social inhibition or increase feelings of anonymity. If you go to a bar, you typically don't see very bright lights, and that's because it decreases your anxiety about being out and being around people. It gives you a sense of anonymity, but also, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's helping certain people. Ow, sorry. Um, Next, hang on one second. All right, sorry about that. I was having an issue with one of my nails. It got caught and started to rip off. So I just talked about lighting. Next is color. So color is going to influence mood. It can increase your arousal or decrease it. Um, Physical strength, creativity, and performance. And all of these might be dependent on the presence of contrasting colors as well as being culturally dependent. But think about it like this. So when I don't know if y'all have heard this, but when people are going on job interviews, they tend to go for bold colors, especially red. Red signifies power. Um, and that could be conveyed very well in an interview. When I was in the pageant circuit, they always said winners wear white. Why? I don't know. But it must signify a winner or elegance or something. Temperature. Increased temperature can impact attraction. So it's going to lower your attraction levels when you're too hot. You're not going to feel as attracted to other people. And it can also increase interpersonal aggression. So it's going to raise your aggression. Noise is going to impact your willingness to assist others. So as noise increases, help decreases. It can enhance aggression, of course. So as noise increases, we tend to have, or sorry, going along with that, as noise increases, we do tend to have an increased need for nonverbal communication because you can't hear. So you have to communicate nonverbally. Smell conditions. This can aid in attractiveness. So approach versus avoid. If you smell good, we might approach. If you don't smell so good, we might avoid. It can also impact emotional reactions. Um, I think I've talked about this in this class. My mom passed last May, and I have a perfume that I don't wear or use very often because I don't want to run out of it. And it is a smell that my mom used to wear. So when I do smell it, it reminds me of her. And sometimes it's a very happy memory. Sometimes I just feel really sad about it. So it can increase our emotional reactions, aids in your distance preferences, gaze patterns, and facial expressions as well. I forgot to bold presence of architectural elements, but that's another condition. And it can facilitate support. So, support for a building, columns, walls, but it can also interfere with your interpersonal exchange. So if there's a wall in the way, you may not be able to talk to the person. You have to walk out and walk around to get to them. Excuse me. And then finally, objects and personal belongings. These are used to manipulate personal vulnerable states. So putting things directly across from you versus adjacent. Men typically put things directly across because that's their vulnerable state. Women tend to put things adjacent to them. And sex specific objects can signal that certain people do not belong. So having STEM posters with only men on them, that's what I mean by sex specific. That can signify that women don't belong in that classroom. That's why it's important to be inclusive. And then unreceptive environments due to objects force us to change our nonverbal communication. So we do adapt based on objects. Next, we've got the power of social goals. So, in addition to behavior settings impacting nonverbal communication, the role of social goals requires some attention. These determine the sending and receiving. Sorry about that. Sending and receiving of nonverbal signals, and that shapes the dynamic relationship, right? And it can do so through belonging, understanding, controlling, enhancing the self, and privacy goals. Um, these all impact our environmental behavior. Okay. So your goals really do matter for our behavioral settings. What goals do you have? Do you want to control the situation? Do you want to belong? Do you want to understand? I mean, that's going to impact how you behave nonverbally as well. Check out the figure I've pasted below in the notes. It shows how it all works together. You can click on it and make it bigger. It'll help. So moving forward, the Steg Vandenberg and De Groot 2012 reading. A lot of this is just similar information, so it doesn't go in as much depth. But there are some important parts. So uniformities in the appraisal of built space. So there are three types of uniformities. The first is formal. These are abstract concepts. So they are complex. They have order, and it can be enclosures. Next is symbolic. This is the design style that the building or the architectural built space um, uses, so Art Deco or postmodern or Victorian or whatever it is. And then schematic. So this is the design's goodness of example or typicality for its functional category, right? So if you have a restaurant and you have the check-in host stand clear at the back of the restaurant, that's probably not designed well, right? You should have the host stand right up front so um, when people come in, they can request a table. Okay. There are also observer differences. So, personal preference impacts how you communicate, um, depending on what types of buildings you like or what kind of enclosures or functions or whatever you're looking for. So, that can impact your preference and how you communicate. Training and occupation also influence the communication and environmental appraisal. So, if you tend to have more education or specialized training, you might appreciate or appraise physical environments differently than the average person. Architectural meaning. Associations from a person's life does impact the emotions evoked and how you communicate with others near or in that physical environment. So, if something bad happened to you at a certain restaurant, say you got broken up with, you probably don't want to go to that restaurant. And if you do go, you're probably going to be glum and sad and not want to talk to whoever you're with. That impacts your communication for sure. And then finally, there are some I cannot talk tonight. Design approaches that promote well-being and healthy behavior. So social design. It fits the needs and behaviors of the occupants and it satisfies the needs of the users. It can positively change behavior, enhance personal control, facilitate social support, employ manageability for users to find their way without becoming lost or confused. Think about when you go to a hospital and they're like, oh, to get to the food court, you take the elevator to floor 3, and then you have to get off that elevator, walk across the catwalk, and take the elevator down to the ground level because you can't get to the ground level from the elevator that's on this floor, right? That's not a good design, and it's not fitting or satisfying the needs of the users. Okay. Biophilic designs. These are the tendency to affiliate with nature and natural elements closely related with the restoration of buildings. So when a building becomes a like a landmark and they just restore the building to its natural former glory, that is biophilic. Another area that I think can kind of fit with the biophilic, which it's still a new technology, but I think it's going to impact really how we communicate at the end of our lives. Um, there's obviously you can be cremated or you can be buried, but there is now a company, and I'm sure it's like not hundreds of thousands, thousands of dollars. They will turn your body into a tree to be planted. So like your ashes become a part of the tree and then you get planted. And that's kind of cool. And that's, I mean, taking it back to nature and the natural elements. And then finally, there's evidence based. So the design should be informed by the best available evidence on the effectiveness of each design decision. So you should have the most information to make these decisions about this building, and that's going to impact how you communicate it. There's nothing more frustrating when somebody, um, so when I was growing up, our neighbors built this, I don't know, garage enclosure on their land that was right next to our house. And it caused a lot of problems because it was built on top of things that it shouldn't have been built on top of and created a lot of issues. And whoever approved it by the city really shouldn't have approved it. But it got approved, but they ended up having to tear it down like a year later anyway. So things happen, I guess. Um, so yeah, that is where we're going to stop for week 8 notes. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to answer anything. Give me one second. I want to pull up the syllabus really quick. Mhm. Oh my gosh. All right. Okay, so yeah, for this week, you just have a discussion question. Um, due. Next week, you have a discussion question due as well. Looking forward on week 12, that is when you're going to email me to set up your 10-minute meeting for week 13. And I will remind you of that in an email on week 12, but just kind of putting it on your radar right now. So you're going to set up a meeting with me to talk about your projects because those are coming up soon. All right. Have a wonderful week, and I will be here if you need me. All right. Bye.